Hey, what's up? Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Roll Pod, an Alabama sports podcast from Bama 247. I am your host, Cody Goodwin, and joining me today on this Sunday evening that we're recording this, whether you guys are hearing this on Sunday or Monday, I think is up to whether or not this gets uploaded on time. But we're here with senior writer John Talty. And John, I feel like a book could probably be written about the Iron Bowl, and a book that is written about the Iron Bowl could probably run 300 some pages, and each chapter is probably named after each legendary game, right? Punt, Bama punt, bow over the top, the comeback, kick six. What in the world are we calling this one?
Well, first off, that's a great book idea. You should probably keep that one to yourself and try to pitch that one day. I like that. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think there are some great options. I was having some fun with it on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it.
Still Twitter.
I mean, I think the ones that seem to have the most staying power are either the mill throw, which I think is fun, or the nightmare in Jordan Hare. I think both of those are probably. I think those are two of the, like, you're trying to have fun, but also have some staying power. I think those two. I think 4th-and-31 clearly is going to have some staying power. The Alabama-Georgia national championship is commonly just referred to as 2nd-and-26. So I could see 4th-and-31 working there. There were some fun ones. I'm sure you saw some. I thought some of the James Bond inspired ones were very fun. I have to admit, and I'm sure Auburn fans do not like it, but I did laugh at the disaster in the passer. I thought that was a fun one. I think somebody also was like the Hail Mary and the dairy. I laughed at that one too. I mean, there were some pretty good creative ones out there. But I think what I will probably do will either be the mill throw or the nightmare in Jordan Hare. Those are the two that I think I'm leaning toward. What about you?
I like those. I liked, I'm not the foremost 007 aficionado, but I did like From Milrow with Love.
I love that one
good.
too. Yeah.
I also liked 4th and Milrow. That was good. Trying to think, Gravedigger, like, just because that's the name of the play. Which, side note, I loved how Saban was like, if there was a name I wouldn't tell you, and then Isaiah Bond was like, yeah, here's what it's called.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, that was good.
I think 4th-and-31, just because 2nd-and-26 is held in such high regard, and then like to do it at Jordan Hare on the 10-year anniversary of kick six, like, I feel like 4th-and-31, even if it's not like a factually correct title, because it was like technically 4th and goal. I feel like 4th-and-31 is probably just going to stick, just because, they got their get back finally. And also 2nd-and-26 just seems to stick. So 4th-and-31, I don't know. That's probably what I will call it. But, if there's a lot of good options there, which I think has been the fun part of, kind of looking back at it over the last 24 hours or so.
Yeah, and I saw, there were some Alabama fans that were like, hey, we just call this a win on a Saturday, blah, blah, blah. So I get it. I understand that mentality, but I want to be like, this is for us. Like, we need something that's a shorthand to refer to that game. Like, people know when you say kick six, they know what you're referring to. When you say 2nd-and-26, they know what you're referring to. Rather than having to be in the 2013 Iron Bowl, like, you say kick six. Yep, know what it was, know where I was when that happened. And so that's why you need, kind of nicknames or shorthands for games like this, because it just makes it easier to, yep, I know exactly what that was. So I think 4th-and-31, to your point, is probably, it definitely has a strong contender. I like some of the ones that have a little bit more to it. I guess maybe that's more of an Auburn thing with, the prayer and Jordan Hare, the kick six, stuff like, punt, Bama punt, all these different names for it. But I do think some of them are pretty funny. And I will say, I knew I was going to say this on our podcast. You were skeptical of the House of Horrors. You came in, you didn't believe it. You're like, yeah, I don't care. Alabama's so much more talented, blah, blah, blah. They're going to crush them. And I just want to hear, and I want our audience to hear, have you learned something having your first Iron Bowl experience at Auburn?
I think I learned my lesson. And it was when Reichard missed the field goal that I was like, oh, okay, this might be a real thing. Because, yeah, I'll freely admit, like, I didn't care that voodoo took place at Jordan Hare. I didn't care that Auburn had won 2 of the last 3 meetings, and the third one that Alabama won took 4 overtimes. I didn't care that just, I didn't want to believe in it, because, like, it's just goofy, and maybe that's just me being the new guy and being naive and whatnot. But they were the way they were able to, Auburn was able to bounce back after Alabama looked really good on their first few drives. And then Reichard missed the field goal. And then I think it was Auburn's ensuing drive after that, 16 plays at 8 minutes off the clock. I was like, okay, I think I get it now. Which this is for better or for worse. We do the behind enemy lines trade, home and home with the other 247 websites. And I did it for Auburn Undercover. And I even wrote because they asked for a prediction. I'm like, 35-7 is what I told our guys. So I think I need to stand on that because that was already published by the time that, the Q&A went up. But I even said, I was just like, I know that weird things have happened there previously, but I just, for whatever reason, I don't see it. And maybe this is an overshot on my part, but if it's closer and Auburn makes it a really good game, I'll come back and apologize. So I went back to that thread on Auburn's 247 website and I apologized, and they were not in the best mood. So maybe that wasn't the best move on my part. They weren't very happy with that.
Did they tell you to beat it, Cody?
They said a lot of stuff. I'm not gonna out them. I'm not gonna be a narc, but there were a couple of things that I screenshotted because I was like, that's classy. But they, to be fair, if somebody came back in on my turf after my team lost, I wouldn't be particularly happy either. So I get it. But I was impressed. I was impressed with the way Auburn played, night and day difference from their embarrassing loss to New Mexico State. I was impressed by what they were able to do against an Alabama defense that we thought had a lot of brick wall qualities. They've just been very, very good at a lot of different aspects. And just the reason I thought Alabama was the reason I thought they would win comfortably is because Auburn's strength just matched up against Alabama's strength. And I just, defense tends to win out more often than not. But obviously I didn't take into account the Jordan Hare voodoo that takes place. And it was a lot of fun. I learned my lesson, but it was a lot of fun, and I am excited for the next one because I didn't believe it, and now I do. And I don't know, maybe 4th and 31 exercise some demons. So who knows if the voodoo is actually going to be real next time? The last decade since kick six, maybe that was the hex, and 4th and 31 kind of relieved Alabama of that. I don't know.
There's just something about it, and obviously you guys experience it. That place for a big game, it's pretty incredible. I mean, it gets very loud. The fans are very into it, and you can just feel. And I felt like when that touchdown got called back on a CJ Dupree holding penalty, where they would have went up 14-0. I felt like that was a massive turning point where it felt like, all right, you get up 14-0, kind of take the crowd out of the game. You really put the pressure on Peyton Thorne, and it felt like if that happens. They scored and it came back, but if that touchdown stays, it's like, all right, Bama's just going to start rolling, right? And then comes back, they don't score, and then Auburn goes down and scores and ties it up 7-7. You think, okay, here we go, here comes what happens. And I'd be curious. Obviously, he would never admit this, but we've seen in the past, I feel like with Jimbo Fisher, I think with Lane Kiffin, where you see exotic stuff when they play Alabama, where it feels like they held back some of their best stuff. All right, when we play Alabama, we're breaking out all the motions. We're doing all these different things. And so for them to play as just – and I watched a lot of the game the week before, as pitifully as they did against New Mexico State, and then to come out and play as well as they did against Alabama. Now, I don't think Alabama played great, but I do feel like Auburn played pretty well. I thought they executed well. I thought they had some interesting play designs that clearly were meant to confuse Alabama that, Hugh Freeze, who has had success against Nick Saban, it was obviously a big storyline heading into the game that, he might have held back some things, thought, hey, I don't need to burn this against New Mexico State. Let's rock this against Alabama. And we saw them, give them everything they could handle. And it felt like at moments like Auburn could just do whatever they wanted offensively. And we really have not seen that against this Alabama defense very often. There are moments, I think, against Texas where it felt like Texas could kind of do what it wanted. There are moments, with LSU, especially in that first half, felt like they could do what they wanted. But by and large, this Alabama defense has been very good. We've said numerous times we think they're championship caliber, and they took a beating at times against Auburn, and that would be, and we'll hit on this at the end, but that would give me some pause about Georgia and what Georgia's capable of doing. That there's a little bit of a playbook here of how you can really give Bama some problems.
Yeah, no doubt. We're almost 10 minutes in. We're here to discuss Alabama's 27-24 win over Auburn. Thrilling, exciting latest chapter in the Iron Bowl history. And it was man, was Auburn's ability to do what they did, like, was that your biggest takeaway, or like what was kind of your instant big picture reaction to the game? Just the fact that Alabama survived, that Auburn was able to
Yeah, I
execute,
mean,
like
yeah, I think for me, I mean, it's kind of the column that I ended up writing was that, there's just something about this team, and I don't want to call them a team of destiny. I think if they beat Georgia, then maybe that is kind of the moniker that you give this team. But it just feels like they find these ways to win these games that you feel like should not be winnable. And I don't think that'll ever feel more apparent than that game, last night. And, especially that end of stretch where it takes a muff punt, in which the guy returning the punt is not the guy who Hugh Freeze was returning the punt. I mean, that's just a weird kind of fluky thing. They get the
goofy.
ball, and then, and I know you did a great job writing about that. And then, just what happens that final drive with the, Seth McLaughlin snap. And, I know that there's Nick Saban talked on Sunday about, basically confirmed without confirming that an Auburn player clapping, might have caused some of that where Jalen wasn't ready for it. They lose, was it 18 yards? And I just, when you're watching that play, again, this is not an Alabama team you ever give up on, but like, I mean, the chances of success of winning that game in that moment, I think ESPN had 99.7% that Auburn was going to win. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. But there have been other moments this season where it felt like, all right, Alabama's going to lose, and we got kind of ready. All right, let's prepare what we're going to talk about, what we're going to write about. And then they found a way to win. And so I just think everything is on the table. It's been on the table for this team. I think it gives you confidence heading into next week that even though they're obviously going to be an underdog and are an underdog, and Georgia deservedly is the favorite, that, could I see something weird happen in that game? Absolutely. That's just who this team is. And it might just be at the end of the season, we look back and be like, that was this team's special quality, that they had that resilience, that they never folded, even when they probably should have.
No, that's exactly kind of what my takeaway was. Like, the game was more or less a microcosm of their entire season. Like, think about a lot of the things that they have struggled with over the course of the season. The bad snaps, like that has been an issue literally since week one.
Yep.
The fact that the offense at times, it looked ineffective, especially late in the game. They had back-to-back 3-and-outs, and after the second one, after the second three and out was the punt that led to a fumble, or the muff punt. But then that's the idea of this team finding a way to come up with big plays. Like, we've seen that game after game after game, and they were able to do it again in this one. Milroe's running ability has really helped open up the offense through the second half of the season, and he wasn't doing much of that in the first half, and then he started doing a little bit more in the second half, and it helped at least get the offense in position. We saw some really silly penalties that wiped touchdowns off the board. Like, it has been a while since we've seen that, but like, they have had 8 touchdowns pulled off the board this season due to penalties, and most of it, like 2 against Texas, like that was a big one. But like, up into the A&M game, like they had 6, and we didn't see it for a while. And then boom, 2 in this one game, and, Jordan Hare voodoo, whatever. But like, through it all, Alabama found a way to overcome all of that. And especially on that last offensive series, right? Like, loss of 1, bad snap, penalty, 4th-and-31. Through all of that, they were able to overcome it and do something miraculous. And now we're sitting here talking about an 11-1 football team that is, on the doorstep of the college football playoff. They're going to be playing top-ranked Georgia for an SEC title. Like, not something that we would have thought after week 2 or week 3. And yet they have figured out a way to get into this position. And you can argue that, like, with the talent on this team, that they always should have been here, but it was not an easy road to get here. And that game was not an easy game for them to win. And yet somehow they did. And somehow here they are. It was kind of fun to see them go through all of that in a single game, but also, like, to be able to chronicle everything that they've gone through this season. It's been fun and entertaining.
Yeah, and I think it's, to be cheesy for a second, I think this is in part why, Nick Saban always talks about, the process and not just the results, and really kind of focusing more on the journey. Because you're right. Like, I remember before the season, I picked Alabama to go 11-1, and I remember writing, I think they lose
Nailed
to one.
it.
Well, as almost 100% nailed. I said I think they're going to lose to one of the two Texas schools. Everyone's picking Texas. I'll pick A&M, but I think it's one of the two. That happened, right? And so if I fast forwarded from when I made that prediction to right now, I'd be like, yep, nailed it. This is exactly what we thought. But having lived it week to week, there are many times where I thought that wasn't going to happen, right? Because it was so up and down. There were so many questions. There were so many times where it felt like if it just breaks this one other way, they're going to lose. And so I think it's what's made this season so exciting. We've talked about it a lot in this podcast. And, I know fans have had to kind of grapple with it. They love the joyless murder ball where the result is certain the moment the game kicks off. And that's just never been this team. And, I think if they can keep winning, I think we've seen fans appreciate them more and more. And I know that I've appreciated that. Like, it's always interesting. I would say heading into this Iron Bowl, because you kind of sucked me into, I said all year, House of Horrors, House of Horrors. And I think my prediction, I still picked them to win pretty convincingly. I kind of bought into it. And it was probably the game that I felt most sure of outside of course, UT Chattanooga, that they were going to win now. And then it came down to the most improbable Iron Bowl moment since the kick six. And so just shows this team is fun. It's aggravating. It's exciting. It's all of those things. And like you said, we kind of got it all in that game. And I think it's going to be exciting to see, what do they have in store for us against Georgia and what's going to be, by far their toughest test yet.
Yeah. Uncheck the joyless murder ball box and put a full big red check in the just win, baby, win box, because that's all they needed to do. And that's all they've done.
Survive in advance, that's what it's been. And I do think it's been joyful, though. That's what's kind of interesting is that I think fans love the joyless Nick Saban, but he's been more joyful. I mean, even just, and you wrote about this on Bama 24/7, like, him just kind of how he walked in and how he started talking about it. It's just like, what do you even really want me to say? I mean, he's done that a couple times this year with this team, which is just like, he just kind of smiles and shakes his head. It's just like, I don't know any more than you guys know. Right. And I think there's a bemused aspect of Saban that I think is kind of joyful that like, this is a weird team and he's just trying to do everything he can to get him across the finish line.
Yeah. And I know I've made this comment before, whether I've written it or, I've said it here on the show or in other interviews, like, he's thoroughly enjoying coaching this team because they have just steadily gotten better every single week. Like, how often, like, you've been covering Alabama for a long time, how often do they hit a high profile week one matchup like Alabama Clemson, Alabama Florida State, Alabama somebody, and they just smack them week one, 49-7, like the joyless murder ball. And it's like, well, Alabama's going to be good again. And then people kind of forget about them until the bigger games or the SEC championship game or Alabama LSU, Alabama Auburn, whatever. This was not that team. Like, yes, they smacked Middle Tennessee State, but their first big test, Texas, they lost by 10 at home. Like, and they looked bad, like it was different. It's not what people were used to. And since then, just they've steadily climbed the ladder. Like, Milroe got better. The defense tightened up. Like, the defense kind of returned to the old form of, some of those early Saban tenure defenses, but like Milroe had to, steadily improve. With his transformation, the offense has taken flight, and with the confidence of knowing how good the offense can be now, like the entire team just kind of radiates an aura that they didn't have through the first few weeks of the season. And it's been really fun to watch. And it's just, instead of blowing out another top tier team in week one, and then it's like, okay, like how are they going to score 40 points this week? It's like, no, like, what's Milroe going to do this week? Like, what is he going to improve on? Is he going to run the ball? Is he going to throw it deep? Is he going to throw it low? Like, he's going to throw it short? Are they going to run the ball? Like, is the offensive line going to be better? Like, there's just been a lot of little things that we've kind of had to keep tabs on. And, it's been fun to watch the entire operation improve and get better. Which is like, one, the point of like sports as a whole, but two, like, with a team this talented, it's like, well, duh, but it's also like, that's never a guarantee. Like, they could have very easily lost a lot of those games in the middle of the season, but they found ways to win and position themselves to where they're at now.
Yeah. And I think that the guys that we work with at 24/7 Sports, do an incredible job with talent eval and rankings and all that. But I do think we're entering into, and I think we've written about it some too. And it's, like, there's that 2021 period where, because of pandemic and not able to, get guys in person, things like that, where I think it's led to a weird kind of blip where, like, yes, Alabama on paper, some might say is maybe as talented as it's ever been. But when you look with your eyes, like, this is not as talented as some of the teams that I've seen them have in the past. Now, they have multiple guys who are going to play in the NFL and things like that. But I can even think back to that 2020 team that was during the pandemic, but just absolutely just routed through all of college football with all the talent they had. I mean, it was just absurd. You watch them like, yeah, this team is by far and large way better than everyone pretty much they're going on the field against. I haven't really felt that way that often this season. And so I think that's something that, we build it off recruiting rankings, which I think I'm a big believer in their value and, all those different things, obviously. But I do think that just these kind of teams, and I think it'll fix itself in the next year or two. But I just think that some of these teams of the 2020, 2021 guys, we've just seen more misses, more busts, I think, out of that class, just because of the reality of not being able to eval those guys in person and just some of the other things that happened during that time frame.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. Be kind of interesting to see how things level off over the next, maybe couple years or so, once kind of the COVID kids, I think, as we refer to them, cycle their way through. Back to the Iron Bowl. Offense had some highs, had some lows. There's times where it's like, yep, that's the Alabama offense we've seen. There were other times where it's just like, what in the world is wrong? We've alluded to it a little bit, but what was one thing that you liked about the way Alabama played on offense against Auburn?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it was a weird game where, like you said, at times it felt like it was working. I mean, I liked that, and you kind of hit on this already a little bit, that like there were times in the first half. I'll give you an answer of what I didn't like, but then it leads to what I liked. That like there were times in the first half, and I think that Auburn was using its spy at times, but it felt like there were moments where Jalen could have gone, and I don't know if it was hesitancy or, they ended up having two penalties where he should have just ran and then ran across the line and tried to throw a pass, which was kind of a weird hesitancy from him that I don't think we've seen quite as much, especially recently. But it felt like he was much more effective running the ball in the second half. I mean, there were multiple long runs that he had. That one where, it's still kind of shocking he didn't get the first down when kind of collided with Nehemiah Pritchett, one of the more violent collisions.
Stoned him.
That was pretty wild. But that was still like a 19-yard run. It was one of those where he was much more willing to take off and say, you know what, like, if I need to get the yards, it's dire, I need to do it. And so maybe that was just part of it too, of like, hey, let's try to protect you a little bit. And then, there's obviously games to come, but by the second half, it's like, you got to go. I don't know if that was what the adjustment was. It felt like it might have been something like that, because it just didn't feel like he was that willing to do it in the first half. In the second half, as things really kind of ratcheted up, it felt like he was willing to do it more and was effective in doing it. And I think when he does that, it just feels like the offense opens up so much more. It becomes so much more dynamic and so much more difficult to stop. When you've got a guy like that, and we saw it, and I think we talked about it with LSU, Jane Daniels, like when you have a guy who can do both, it's just, you're just always on your heels, right? And I think that's something that Milroe brings to the table. And so I like that we saw it in the second half. And I think I just talked myself into a theory as to why it didn't happen more in the first half, but I am still kind of curious why we didn't see more of that.
A little bit of spy from Auburn, and then also just, it seemed like it was a lot of hesitancy from Milroe, which is also like, that was one of the things I didn't like. I think the biggest thing I didn't like about the offense was just the penalties, taking the touchdowns off the board. Like, you cannot do that next week. No. It's more of like a big picture thing. And again, we hadn't seen it. Like after the A&M game, they had a stretch where just offensively, they played a lot cleaner football, and they didn't, take points off the board, because you're going to need as many points as you could probably get next week against Georgia. But yeah, I liked that Milroe was able to overcome all of this stuff and still find ways to make plays. Like it sounds very coach speak and cliche, but like when Saban's like, the biggest thing we had to teach him was just like play the next play, right? Like don't let the last play impact, and it sounds very coach speaky, and sometimes we'll roll our eyes, but like when you watch it in live action, like it's a very impressive trait to have. And, I don't know if you went and watched, certain replays, but like when he throws 4th-and-31, like they catch, like Bond catches it, everybody goes crazy, the sideline erupts, and Milroe's very like calm, looks to the sideline, like, what are we doing? What's next? Saban's holding up one finger, just kick the extra point. just very calm about the whole thing. He was very calm about the bad snap. He was very calm about the penalty again, which was just dumb. Like 2 illegal forward passes. Like, what are you doing, bro? But like, just to be able to compartmentalize everything and like to see it in real time in a very, very crucial game, crucial moments all throughout the second half. That to me was like super impressive. And it's, if something were to happen next week, I think there should be a lot of confidence that he can flush it and move to the next thing and, be able to put his best foot forward and, if not erase fully the mistake, at least, try and take a step back in the right direction. That just the mental toughness and resiliency from Jalen Milroe, like that he's able to show it, bodes well, obviously, for Alabama's offense, because if he's showing it, everybody else is going to feed off that.
Right. And I think that, and I know you weren't here for it last year, but you went through the whole rewatch. Like, I thought that was one of Bryce Young's best characteristics and best attributes. It's just that you felt like he always had that calming presence. You never felt like he panicked. There were so many moments last year where I felt like, things are collapsing around him. And you just always felt like he was going to figure it out. He wasn't going to overly react. And I do think, like you said, it can be coach speak, whatever. But just think about it in your own life. Like, you make a mistake and, in poker, it's, going on tilt, whatever you want to call it. But like, you make a mistake and like, can you take a step back, center yourself, and then do it right? Or do you kind of double down and make another mistake? I mean, I know that I get frustrated at myself, and sometimes it leads to an even bigger mistake in something I'm trying to do because I'm rushing or whatever it might be. And so that's a huge skill to have in your quarterback, because like you said, everybody feeds off of that. And I think there are moments where, we've talked about, I think, where the hesitancy from Jalen offense might have fed off of that, because it did look at times where, we said this a lot earlier on in the season, where it just felt like Alabama just wasn't willing, just couldn't put teams away, where it felt like, where's that killer instinct? And in the first half, I kept thinking, all right, this team is clearly better. You just got to kill them and be done with it. Kill them in front of the crowd, gladiator style, right? In front of the Coliseum, and then be done and move on. And that's what you had to do this Auburn team. That's what you have to do in environments like that. You have to kill them early before they build confidence. And it felt like there were so many chances for them to do that. They just couldn't do it. And that's an issue. And it's, we've seen other teams have that same struggle when they travel to Auburn, but that was concerning to me. But then, obviously the heroics in the second half, that's what you're going to think about more.
Yeah, 100%. The defense, they got Hugh Freezed. It was just they played as poorly as they had all season, probably. Like, I know Sark got the best of them, but most of that was through the air. Texas didn't really have a ton of success running on them. No team has had a lot of success running on this Alabama team. I think going into this game, they had faced like 4 of the top 5 rushers in the SEC and held 3 of those 4 to well below their per game season averages. The only one that didn't was Jaden Daniels, LSU's quarterback, because nobody has stopped that guy this season, except I guess maybe Dallas Turner, if we, just because he took him out of the game. But like, what we think of the defensive performance? Like, was there anything to like about it, or what was your overall assessment?
Not great, is what I would say. I mean, what's interesting about it was that, like, and again, I kind of already gave credit. I thought they did a great job. I thought they had a great game plan. But if you look at it from purely a macro sense, like, Peyton Thorne, not very good at throwing the ball. They are a team that likes to run the ball. Alabama's good at stopping the run. It just felt like you said, strength on strength. Like, all right, sell out to make Peyton Thorne beat you in the air. He's not going to be able to. And it's, we saw Jerry Kill, New Mexico State, be able to do that. And they just, they looked bad. And that's what I thought the game plan was going to be. That's what you expected it to be. And I mean, Peyton Thorne was just putting them on skates, man. It was pretty impressive for that guy. And, I obviously already had a lot of respect for, Jarquez Hunter and just what he's able to do. But I mean, they were running the ball hard. Bama did not have a great answer for it. It didn't look, I haven't done the rewatch, so maybe you have a better sense in this, but just on the initial watch, it felt like, Deontay Lawson and Jalen Key coming back. It felt like both of them were maybe, especially Deontay, maybe a step slow. Didn't feel like they were 100% game speed. And that's obviously understandable coming into a game after missing some time. But it just felt like, I don't know, they just were just a step slow, it felt like at times. And Auburn obviously when they've got that kind of speedball thing going where it's just, that rhythm and momentum. And I mean, you could go back to 2013, 2014, people were writing stories, including myself, about how Alabama struggles against that. And it's just something that I think I think everybody struggles against it, but it's just something that I think Nick Saban, and Alabama have struggled against. They've made a lot of adjustments to try to handle it in terms of their terminology, how they call plays, all these different things. But at the end of the day, it just a quarterback who can run and a fast up-tempo offense is going to give Alabama some problems. And, we saw that. Hugh Freeze is good at attacking Nick Saban, and that's in part why Nick Saban wanted to hire him. There's a lot of respect there for what Hugh Freeze is capable of doing, and we saw that. So not everyone can do that, but big picture wise, like that defense, I was not encouraged. And I think that, again, knowing what Georgia is capable of, it's kind of like, you've got Jaws coming up next week that can they capitalize on similar things? That would be the concern.
Yeah, I think the one thing that kind of stuck out, and I noticed this in game, because Auburn's quarterbacks combined to go 6 of 17. So there wasn't a lot of passing success, but the one drive that they actually did have passing success was the drive that I believe they went down to take the 21-20 lead, where Thorne hit, like there were just two big passes. Like it was a 5-play, 75-yard drive. And he hit both of those passes to, Javarius Johnson. Like he had that 37-yarder down the middle of the field, and then he had that 27-yard touchdown. Just like real quick, bang, bang. And what stood out about that specifically was like both the plays where Johnson got open, pre-snap motion into a stacked alignment that caused Alabama secondary a lot of confusion. And we saw that last year against Tennessee. We saw that last year against LSU. We saw it again earlier this year against Texas. We thought that maybe they had kind of figured some things out against against like LSU, for example. I know they had that one bust early in the game, but then after that, Jaden Daniels kind of took over. This game, it kind of came back. It was a combination of like Hugh Freeze knowing what Alabama secondary struggles with, using that, but then also like, that led to that one touchdown, but Freeze was able to use a lot of motion and stuff to open up stuff in the run game too. They run a lot of RPO stuff, which feeds right into Peyton Thorne. Robbie Ashford got some snaps and he ran the ball. Jarquez Hunter ran the ball really hard too. Alston also ran really well, like 8.5 yards a carry. I mean, they stacked up 272 rushing yards when you adjust for sacks at 7 yards a pop. And so what they were doing was like a lot of pre-snap motion to kind of move the linebackers. Like it wasn't quite the same as Sark's, motion-based matchups for passing game. Auburn was doing it to create running lanes. Like they were, let's pull this linebacker out of here, or let's pull these guys over here and then we'll run that way. And, you hit on it too, because I asked both Terry and Arnold and Malachi Moore afterward, like, you guys have been very good against the run. They ran it down your throat. Like, was this just stuff that they hadn't been doing? And it wasn't like, not that it wasn't on tape, but it wasn't something that they did a lot of. And so a lot of the stuff that they were doing, I don't want to say they saved it for Alabama, but they probably saved a lot of that stuff for Alabama. Like, Terry and Arnold's he's a film room junkie. Like this was not something that they saw a lot of on film. Like he just readily admitted that. And it was just, he got them that the motion got the defenders out of their gaps. It got, and then it met you. I mean, you hit on it too with Jalen Key and Deontay Lawson not being at a fully 100%, or at least not at 100% game speed. Like that made an impact, because that's just, if you're not at 100% game speed and there's a lane that opens, you're not fast enough to close it. That can be the difference between a 2-yard gain and, some cases 10, 15, 20-yard gain. And that's, Alabama had only given up 3 runs of 40 yards or more this season. Auburn had 2 in the first half. Like, just because they were able to get to those creases, and they have good athletes over there. And it was stunning to see. And Saban admitted as much that, like, yes, like Auburn was going to come in, they were going to run the ball. It seems like no matter the year, no matter the coach, no matter the personnel, Auburn is always going to run the ball. I think back to like 2013 after kick 6, when they just beat the tar out of Mizzou in the SEC championship game. They ran for like 600 yards. Like this is what Auburn does. Right. And so the combination of that's the game plan, they executed it flawlessly. And also Alabama, the early penalty that took the touchdown off the board. So instead of going up 2 scores early, it's 7-7. Like that played right into Auburn's hands. And that's why the game got weird for a minute. And Alabama was never able to kind of put their foot on Auburn's neck. And Auburn was able to hang around. And, that's at least what I saw. And it was very, very impressive execution, and also like a little worrisome because, that pre-snap motion, mobile quarterbacks, strong running backs, like these are things that we have been talking about for most of the season as like, look, this can give Alabama's defense fits. The pre-snap motion stuff has routinely given Nick Saban's defenses fits, and there's a lot of it on tape, both as successful rushing offenses and with Texas successfully using it in the passing game. Georgia's got a lot of weapons, man, like to quietly, quickly glance ahead. I know we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute, but like Georgia's got a lot of film that they can look at and say, okay, this is how we can attack as long as everybody's healthy and good to go. Like that was what I did not like. There was not a ton to like about Alabama's defensive performance, but that was, I don't know. I feel like if I don't stop now, I'm going to keep rambling about it.
No, but I think you're hitting on an important part that I think is both relevant in this discussion and also relevant moving forward, is that obviously, as the old saying goes, it's about the Jimmies and Joes, right? You got to have the athletes and personnel to be able to have a shot to beat teams like Alabama and Georgia. But then it's the knowledge, which you just hit on. And then finally, it's being able to be creative enough to take all of that and deploy it in a way that is going to cause the other person strife and tension. And that's, I think, ultimately, sometimes we forget how so much of football is really just a chess match, And I think guys like Hugh Freeze and Nick Saban, because of their knowledge of each other, they know exactly what gives the other one problems. And I think back to after Lane Kiffin left Alabama, and I think it was maybe 2021 when Ole Miss was just giving Bama fits to the point where I think Saban even was like wondering if they had their signals, and ultimately said like Kiffin took everything he knew that I had said I did not like dealing with and tried to do all of it against me. And that's kind of the fun part of coaching. And that's what, sometimes it's an overplayed storyline, but when guys like Saban and Kirby Smart go against each other, they both know a lot of, just from a decade plus worth of time in a room together. They know what the other one likes to do, what they don't like to do. And then it's just, okay, how do I use that knowledge, knowing that you also know there's like that kind of like, that I don't like doing this, so I'm going to try to do this to not do that. I mean, you can put your head in a pretzel as I'm doing right now, but it's just a fun trying to figure out. It's a cat and mouse game in some ways. And I think, in many ways, Hugh Freeze won that game against Alabama and Nick Saban. Now we'll see. And I think I'm rambling a little bit here, but to kind of wrap it up, Saban got asked about it today in a teleconference where 2 years ago, Alabama looked awful against Auburn. I think they gave up like 8 or 9 sacks. They find a way to win, and then they play Georgia in the SEC championship game, and everybody thought Georgia was going to win. And it was the best Alabama looked all season. And it looked like they had a whole different game plan. The offensive line looked great, and they ended up winning that game. And it was like, whoa, man, they just threw a knockout punch on Georgia. That, to me, is what's going to be interesting about moving forward, is how do you take this experience and spin it against a Georgia team that has not lost since that 2021 SEC championship game.
Yeah, no, that'll be very, very interesting. We'll get to that part of the conversation in a second. I did want to say there was one thing I liked about the defensive performance, and that was Terry and Arnold playing lights out and also padding his Thorpe resume with 2 interceptions. I know one was in garbage time in the first half, and the second one was obviously garbage time in the second half. But hey, like I think he also had a pass breakup. Like just. Dude's probably going to be a first-round draft pick in the spring. So, shout out to Terry and Arnold.
Note here too. I've watched multiple replays. I still haven't really seen him step out. Now, I know that doesn't mean anything.
I have the screenshot that I can send you.
Do you think he actually is out?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll take back.
Because I at first I thought he took it back too. Because when I sent the initial final score tweet, I put 33-24. But then they came right as I hit send, they came over the intercom and said he stepped out of bounds, game over. I was like, oh, okay. Then obviously we had a mad dash down to the corner to go talk to Saban and all them. But then when I watched it on the replay, it's very quick, but he steps out. Unfortunately,
as Al Michaels would say, that game meant something to some people out there.
That play specifically meant something probably to a lot of people.
Yes, exactly.
I think we know what the play of the game is, but are there other key plays that you wanted to highlight, or should we just go ahead and skip ahead to who we think the game MVP is?
Yeah, I mean, you wrote about the other one. I think that muff punt, I think, was huge. That was, I think, one of the other, really major plays of the game, and that all obviously kind of they're linked together in history. I think one person suggested from Muff to Milrow. I don't know if that one's got staying power, but I thought that was an interesting one too. But yeah, to me, those are the two main plays. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of other plays that happened that were interesting and all that, but those two, those swung the game.
Yeah, no, big shout out to Jihad Campbell, who got a lot more snaps in the second half because he's a faster linebacker. No offense to Tresman Marshall and a less than 100% Deontay Lawson. Just dude flies around, makes plays. He obviously had the scoop and score against Tennessee. Has gotten a lot of playing time because of the injuries to Lawson and Marshall, and so like him just being at the right place at the right time, like kudos. Also, big shout out to punter James Burnip for the 5 seconds of hang time, which allowed Campbell to get down there and recover the ball. And also, like, side note, Hugh Freeze had no idea that it was his backup punt returner out on the field, wild that you don't
now
know.
In his defense, the one thing I will say in defense is that they have the same jersey number,
which is also wild.
Yeah. Now I don't understand that part of it. Again, I'm not a smart man, but like them at least being the same number, I could see be a little bit like vantage point. All right, 0. Yeah, that's whatever. And then, but the fact that he still didn't know after the game and had to be told by reporters, hey, no, it was actually Corey Moore and instead, like he was just like, I don't know, I got to ask my special teams coordinator. Like that's just wild. And that's the stuff that I think also like sends fans like, freaking out. And that's one thing I will say, not that we need a elongated like comparison here, but like that's something you don't really see Nick Saban do. Like he's very purposeful when he goes into those situations. Like he doesn't want to get caught off guard by that. Like he's gonna know, yeah, it was this guy. Like you just don't see him make those kind of errors post game. And that's just one of those tiny little things that like I think fans respect about him. That like he doesn't. There's not that thing that people can really latch on post game outside of I guess some of his punt return stuff he's talked about this year. The way that I think fans were like, "What are you doing? How do you not know?"
Yeah, no, that's just probably more of an Auburn storyline, but still, just like when I read that, I was like, "Excuse me." So that was one of the many interesting plays at the end of that game that ultimately led to the final decision. Game MVP? Do you have one? Is there one?
I mean, I think it's one of two people, right? I think it's if you want to do a cop out, you can just give it to both Jalen and Isaiah. Isaiah's moment there, I think you could give it to him. But I mean, ultimately, yeah, I mean, it was great. But I mean, Jalen, obviously, what he was able to do to make that happen at the end, I think either one of those, I think, is a worthy option, just given the improbability and then to deliver that the way that they did.
Yeah, no, I think I would go with Milrow for all the reasons that we have talked about, just the resiliency, the production. Like he passed for, what were the final numbers? Passed for 259 yards, ran for another 107, 2 touchdown passes. And here, another crucial part of this that I think gets lost in it.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Pretty awesome. That's more or less the Iron Bowl. We normally end these podcasts with like, what's one question you have about this team moving forward? But like, do you have, I don't know if it's a question or just any early thoughts on Alabama, Georgia. That's obviously what's on deck. And we're going to get into all of that, over the next week or so. But like, what are the early thoughts about Alabama, Georgia for the SEC championship?
Yeah, I mean, I think we hit on a lot of them about kind of our questions moving forward of, what we saw against Auburn and what that could mean against Georgia. I just big picture wise, I've been very impressed by Carson Beck. I think that, there were a couple of teams I would say heading into the season that we viewed as, national title contenders, but they had big question marks at quarterback. And I think that the 3 most prominent ones were Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State. Well, we saw Ohio State lose to Michigan, and quarterback play played a pretty big reason in that. And Ohio State, regardless as to what ESPN's wonky playoff predictor might be saying, Ohio State is essentially out unless just absolute mayhem happens. Georgia has been very good with Carson Beck. I've seen him get better over the course of the season. And of course, as we talked about a lot today, Jalen's done the same for Alabama. So that's kind of an interesting storyline for me, from where we thought preseason what might either make or break these teams was the quarterback position. It certainly looks like Georgia's in a very good place because of that. I caught some of the Georgia Tech game, and Georgia Tech they were feisty. I mean,
Frisky.
yeah, frisky. I like that. They were able to run the ball with some effectiveness, and I was just trying to read a little bit about it, and it felt like some of the fans and kind of Georgia insiders were disappointed about that effort, and we're kind of like, man, if they play like this against Alabama, they're going to lose. So it's kind of interesting that both teams feel like they're coming off one of those tighter than expected rivalry games heading into a game that it's not officially, because Alabama could still not make it if they win, but feels like a national quarterfinal type game where if Georgia loses, they're probably out. If Bama loses, they're absolutely out. And even if they win, they might not get in. Georgia, if they win, they're definitely in. But the stakes are high. The storylines are easy between Kirby and Nick, and we'll see what kind of weirdness we get in Atlanta, because I feel like we're going to get some for sure.
I feel like it'll be a high, not to say that the Iron Bowl was sloppy, because it was a really fun game and it was really entertaining. But there was, I don't know. I think we're going to see a lot more consistent, higher level execution between, a game between Alabama and Georgia. What interests me the most, just kind of at a glance, is that these two teams, I think, are way more similar than not. And not just because Kirby came off of Saban's staff to take over at Georgia, and now they're, kind of the new dynasty in college football. They both started the year with brand new starting quarterbacks who followed on-campus legends, right? Bryce Young, Stetson Bennett. A lot of talent everywhere else on the roster. As they got rolling at the beginning of the year, I know Alabama took the loss to Texas, but they didn't quite look as dominant as we maybe thought they would, right? Like Alabama lost to Texas, struggled with South Florida, looked good against Ole Miss, but then kind of had to eke out some games against A&M and Arkansas, before they really finally hit their stride, I think, in this, starting the second half against Tennessee. Georgia the same way. They, played around a little bit with Auburn, didn't really put away teams until end of October, early November. That's when you really kind of saw Carson Beck and that offense take off, and they kind of morphed into that Death Star that we've all kind of assumed that Georgia would be, and now, despite all of that, despite, kind of the highs and lows of the season, and, is Georgia going to mess around and lose a game here and there? Is Alabama as good as they have been in recent years? Here we are, early December. I guess it's still late November, but by this next weekend, early December, it's Georgia, it's Alabama. It's kind of what we all thought it was going to be at the beginning of the year. Yep. We'll hash out more about the playoff implications after we see what the rankings look like on Tuesday, but very clearly playoff implications with this game, in addition to the SEC championship game. These two teams are just a lot more similar than different. I think if we look a little bit closer at the details, and their makeup is very different, right? The offense for Georgia runs through Brock Bowers. Alabama very much runs through Jalen Milroe. The defense, Georgia, not quite maybe as deep, but still very talented, but maybe could be had a little bit. Alabama's defense has really rounded into form. And, for now, maybe I'll think differently in a couple of days, but that performance against Auburn, maybe a little bit of an aberration. We'll see. And this is one of those games where it's kind of, a clash of titans where it's, win by any means necessary. And if you're Alabama and you get the dub, you'll see where the rest of the dominoes fall with respect to the playoff. And, again, we'll touch on that a little bit more on Tuesday, probably after the rankings come out, but just a very interesting game between two teams that I think are a lot more similar when you take a look at them.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just, I'm excited about it. I mean, I think it's by far, maybe by far is a stretch. I mean, I think Friday night's Oregon, Washington is obviously going to be hotly anticipated, and should hopefully be a really good game too. But, Big Ten, no offense to your Iowa Hawkeyes, probably not going to win that one. But Bama, Georgia, with everything at stake, and this is SEC championship, the last SEC championship where it's East versus West. It's just going to be a fun game. I think there's just there's going to be a lot of buzz around this game. I expect to have a pretty, I think it'll be a great atmosphere. And so it just kind of, this is going to be a long week in some ways for people like you and me, but I'm kind of ready to let's get to it. I'm ready to play this game. I'm excited to see what we actually get to see between these two teams who, like you said, we've been talking about all offseason, all right, Bama versus Georgia, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. It's been a very fun season to this point. And I'm excited to kind of see how it, wraps up. If it wraps up, if it continues, we'll know more after the game this coming weekend. In the lead up to this week, obviously the new playoff rankings come out on Tuesday. We're going to talk with Saban multiple times this week. We'll have some stories and other content on Bama 247 to get you guys ready for the SEC championship game. Any final thoughts on the Iron Bowl or the early look ahead to Alabama, Georgia, John, before we sign off?
No, I mean, I think I've expounded them all. I don't know. So sometimes I've rewatched that play numerous times, and it still kind of boggles the mind a little bit. I'm sure I'll continue to watch it. Just all the things that had to happen for that moment. But I'm just excited for you, Cody, that you got introduced to the Iron Bowl in about as weird of a way as possible. So welcome to that's like your official like introduction, initiation into the society.
I've popped my Jordan Hare voodoo cherry. I get it.
Yeah.
I believe it. I've seen it live. Like it's funny. Like somebody asked Malachi Moore afterwards, like, dude, like how many texts do you have on your phone? Like after a game like that. And he's like, I haven't even checked it yet. Like my phone was pinging like crazy after that game. And we're like trying to get some stuff finalized. We're trying to write some stuff. We're trying to go down and do interviews. And my phone is just like, my brothers are texting me. I got friends who are texting me like, where were you? Were you on the field? How does it compare? Yada, yada, yada. Like that was, hands down one of the coolest, biggest, baddest sporting moments that I think I've ever seen. And like, I'd like to think I've seen a lot of them, most of them probably in the, wrestling circles and whatnot, just like, state championships, NCAA championships, Olympic stuff. But like for that to be like the first time I get to see the Iron Bowl live, like going to be hard to top that in the years ahead.
Pretty good. Yeah. Pretty good.
Pretty good. That's all we've got today, guys. Appreciate you tuning in as always. We'll be back maybe multiple times this week. I know we kind of took the Thanksgiving holiday and weren't able to get a show out to you later last week, so we'll try and make it up to you this week. In the meantime, be sure to rate and review the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, even our Bama 247 YouTube page. Subscribe to Bama 247 and 247 Sports. We have a Black Friday special that I believe is going to linger into Cyber Monday. 75% off an annual subscription. So cash in on that, especially if you're an Alabama fan. But really, if you're just a college sports fan in general, absolutely take advantage of that deal. Put a link to that in the show notes. Thank you again, John, for joining me. Appreciate you guys listening as always, and we will talk to you guys again soon.